From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Sometimes a news story makes you do a double take. I felt that the other day when a friend shared a headline about an increase in something called scromiting. Scromiting refers to an intense form of illness, a mix of screaming and vomiting brought on by overindulging in cannabis. CNN, for example, recently reported that scromiting is on the rise and quoted one female patient who described the pain as worse than childbirth. And the CDC and World Health Organization recently gave official diagnostic codes to cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which is the official term for scromiting. Here's the thing. It turns out ER doctors in Colorado have seen their share of scromiting in patients since the state became one of the first to legalize recreational marijuana in 2012. So we asked one of them for his insights. Dr. Sam Wong practices pediatric emergency medicine and specializes in medical toxicology at Children's Hospital Colorado. He joined me to talk about it. Dr. Wong, you work in pediatric emergency room care. Put us beside you in the ER for a moment. What is it like when a patient comes in with symptoms of scromiting?
We call it cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, and we see it specifically in the adolescent population. And they will come in pretty uncomfortable, pretty severe abdominal pain, frequent vomiting, nausea. Typically, by the time they come see us, they've been unable to control it at home. They've been trying things at home and it just won't get better, and it gets pretty extreme. They're no longer to eat or drink anything.
Wow.
And the severe pain and so they come in and need to see us in the emergency department.
And just to be clear, you and your fellow physicians, do you refer to it as scromiting?
No, we refer to it as cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, or CHS.
Okay. This sounds very intense. The New York Post called it, quote, a nightmare blend of screaming and vomiting. How long does a case of scromiting last? And then just to be clear, does a patient ever actually scream?
Yeah, I think it might be a little bit of an over-dramatization. I think the majority of our patients aren't screaming. They are definitely uncomfortable and do not feel well. By the time they come see us, usually they've had symptoms for at least a couple days, typically, that aren't getting better.
Ooh.
But it's not often a one-and-done thing. For patients who have CHS, it's often a recurrent issue as long as they're frequently and habitually using cannabis. Patients will lose weight. In the short time frame, we can see electrolyte abnormalities from poor nutrition and frequent vomiting, and pretty severe dehydration. So they can be pretty ill when they come and see us.
Now, you told our producer that this doesn't seem to be increasing, but it is a consistent condition you see in Colorado hospitals. How often do you see a case of scromiting?
It's been a little bit hard to put our finger on how frequently this happens. I would say we see this not infrequently. We see it, several times a month, where we see patients who we suspect have this condition.
Okay. And this doesn't seem to be a problem for occasional users. What kind of cannabis user tends to show up in the emergency department with a case of scromiting, and what kinds of products are they using?
From our clinical experience and studies, I've demonstrated that majority of these patients are more frequent or chronic users. So most of them use it daily or weekly, and usually by modes of inhalations, or smoking the flower, or vaping, rather than using edible products.
Okay. So it's inhaled usually. Do you see this more if they're using high potency cannabis as compared to other types?
That's a great question. A lot of us who treat this condition or are looking at this condition think that has something to do with it. Our cannabis is much different than it was 20 years ago. At least in Colorado and most legalized states, flower THC concentration averages in the upper teens to 20%. And concentration products are much higher. I think Colorado's average vaping concentration is in the 60s, 70s. And so the amount of THC, I think, is hypothesized to also contribute to why we're seeing more of this condition.
So how do you stop someone's case of scromiting, and how quickly do the symptoms subside?
Yeah, in the emergency department in the hospital, we will treat them with IV fluids. We'll check their electrolytes. We'll make sure there's no other conditions going on that we don't want to miss, like an appendicitis or something else that can cause abdominal pain and vomiting. We'll treat them with traditional measures with anti-nausea, anti-vomiting medications, but sometimes they'll need different medications that we don't always initially treat patients with nausea and vomiting for. And then if we can get them to stop in the ER and feeling better, the next step is, what do we do when they leave the hospital?
Sure.
And often those recommendations are to decrease their cannabis use, at some level, if not stop altogether. And it can be hard because even when they stop cannabis, the symptoms can persist. And so they can still have symptoms, weeks out, even after stopping cannabis. And so it can be a difficult journey for some of these patients.
I have to ask about one thing that I find so odd. Recent stories on Scromiting mention patients often take a hot shower to ease their symptoms. Why do they crave a hot shower, and does it actually help?
That's has been mentioned as almost one of the diagnostic criteria for this condition. Is not only do they have frequent cannabis use, they have the symptoms, but they also may say hot bathing or hot showering may help initially temporarily relieve the symptoms.
Huh.
And it's thought that could be a few different reasons. It can potentially change how the blood flows from the gut and the stomach away from it,
Okay.
to decrease some of the abdominal pain. And there's some receptors that are heat activated that are thought to be downregulated when cannabis is used frequently. And so when it gets activated by heat, it helps relieve some of that nausea and pain associated with CHS.
You treat adolescent patients who are under the legal age, and sometimes they haven't been open with their parents about their cannabis use. I can imagine that would be a tough conversation to have in the ER with parents who had no idea.
Yeah. And sometimes they know. Sometimes, often these patients come back to see us frequently, and both the patient and the caregiver knows that's part of the problem. And they know it's problematic and it's impacting their health. And they're looking for help just from an acute standpoint to help treat their symptoms. But when they leave the ER, they also want to figure out how they can, stop these symptoms from returning.
Dr. Sam Wong of Children's Hospital, Colorado, thanks so much for demystifying this condition for us.
Thanks for having me. Happy to talk about it.
Dr. Sam Wong practices pediatric emergency medicine and specializes in medical toxicology. We'll put a link to some more news stories about scromiting, or CHS, if we want to use the actual medical term, in our show notes and at KUNC.org. And if you have thoughts on this story or other conversations you've heard on In The NoCo, drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. Email noco@kunc.org. That's it today for In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.